when we bring together ways of knowing, we can have a more complete or a more holistic view of an issue at hand. So we can improve problem solving. We can also do things like build trust and build relationships that are, helping to push forward reconciliation and things like this.
Ani Bojo, Mandy and Indigenous, which means hello everybody. My name is Mandy Wilson. I am originally from a small town called Shabot Lake. Grew up there with a big family. I've always been into plants, always been into nature, and I love spending time on the land. I grew up mostly living off of the land and very traditional type family, lots of hunting, lots of fishing, lots of foraging and things like that. I've always been taught that the plants, the animals, everything from the birds to the bugs to the trees to the rivers, the lakes, the mountains, valleys, and everything in between, we all come from that same source of creation. It's all that one same source. So because of that, we're all interconnected because we all come from that same source.
There's really a nice diversity of water snakes. And
in Western science, we certainly don't have that same approach to relationships. When we think of a group of organisms existing in a particular place at a particular time, which is how scientists define a community, they don't exist alone. They must interact with other species. So if you think of a deer, we call it a herbivore. And for it to exist, to produce babies, to survive the winter, it must eat plant matter. When we think of a wolf, for example, then wolves must sustain themselves for reproduction and survival by eating meat, so by capturing prey. And so with any biological community, we often, as scientists, speak of relationships, and quantifying or understanding those relationships and how strong they are, how many there are within a system is really one of the foundations of community ecology, which is a field in biology that's increasingly important, I think.
Mushrooms are our oldest ancestors. So through the oral traditions and the oral stories, I've been told that mushrooms are our oldest ancestors. They're here. They provide the foundation for all of the plants and animals that live on top of the earth. Without mushrooms, the plants wouldn't exist. Without the plants, the bugs wouldn't exist. Without the bugs, the animals wouldn't exist. Without the animals, we wouldn't exist. So there's a long chain of interconnection that goes back millions and millions and millions of years. There's millions of years of creation laid out in front of us just so we could walk on this land. So to see the earth and the creatures as a relation is to recognize that long lineage of creation that got us to where we are today.
It is pretty clear that humans are very good at altering the environment. We're very good at building buildings, laying cables across the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean to allow for communication, building watercraft and aircraft to transport ourselves, and to devastate whole ecosystems by cutting down forests or draining wetlands and so on. So in that sense, we are a very destructive species. But it is also very clear that we have to think about ourselves as part of nature. When we breathe air, we're breathing in air that was produced by nature, by trees. When we eat food, it is produced by nature in some way or another. We often talk about an ecological footprint, which is a way of measuring our impact on the earth and our impact on ecosystems. And the very notion of an ecological footprint means that we influence the natural world. But the converse is true. As we have negative impacts on the natural world, we are endangering our futures. And so we have to think of ourselves as part of nature, because to do otherwise is just foolhardy. It truly is.
That has the changing cycle of water.
So I consider biological diversity to be critical for many different reasons. I think the first one for me is we would call it philosophical. Just as humans have a right to exist on Earth, I think every species on Earth has a right to exist on Earth. We also know that biological diversity is important for enriching human lives. It contributes directly to human mental health. It contributes directly to physical health. It provides what we call ecosystem services, so things like pollination, where I think over a third of our plant-based foodstuffs requires insect pollinators or bird pollinators and things like that. Biological diversity is important for erosion control. Biological diversity in the form of wetland vegetation purifies our water. And so there are a whole host of things that we depend on. And so I think we tend to forget that biological diversity is the very stuff of our existence. And if we lose biological diversity in its totality, then we too will lose our place on Earth.
The traditional land-based practices help promote biodiversity because there's a mentality that you go into it with of, I'm not going to take too much. I'm only going to take what I need. I like to promote the idea of the honorable harvest. The first thing I always do is assess the situation or the environment to see if there's even enough to take from. But before that, you want to be able to identify a plant. So say you're able to identify dandelion, for example. A lot of people know what dandelion looks like. Say you're able to identify dandelion and you want to go harvest some dandelions. So the first thing you want to do is put yourself in that mentality of, I don't want to take too much and I want to be respectful. So once you've gotten into that mentality, you're going to go out onto the land. And when you find a dandelion, you're not going to take the first one. You never take the first one that you find. But you're also going to assess the situation in the area if there's a large enough patch for you to even take from. Because sometimes we run into a beautiful plant or a beautiful plant relation and say to ourselves, there's not enough for me to take. And that's okay as well. So knowing your limits and knowing what the plants need to survive as well is an important part of it.
If you want to have impact, there are a number of things that you can do right away. And the first is to embrace learning. And that's coming from a teacher or a professor, so take that with a grain of salt. But knowledge is truly power. So the more you know about biological diversity, the more you know about local species, the better able you will be to educate others, including, by the way, your parents. Also, think about joining groups. And the final thing I would say to a young person, and this is going to sound very strange, while you can't vote now, you're going to be voting in the near future. And in a democracy, talking to your potential representatives and influencing the way they think and voting for the people who best represent you, and in my view, best protect biological diversity and the environment for future generations, thinking about how you can get them into power, as we say, is an important facet of this.
To just get out there. Get out there and observe is the first step, to just be present with nature. Sometimes that means you can just walk out into the forest and observe the way the bark looks or how it peels or what the tree or what the plant looks like throughout various different seasons. Those are all steps that you can take to get to know the land or get a better connection with the relations. And I would always suggest to ask questions. If there's anybody that you trust or that you know has plant knowledge, ask questions, because we want nothing more than everybody to be able to look at a plant and say, I know what that is.